Morning, everyone, and welcome to our fourth and final installment of Marco's Microplastics webinar series. We're very glad to have you all with us today. For those of you who I have not had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Will Eisenberg, and I'm a coastal planner in the Virginia Coastal Zone Management Program. I'm also the state co-lead for Marco's Marine Debris Work Group, serving alongside NOAA's Katie Morgan. Marco itself is the Mid-Atlantic Regional Council on the Ocean, and it is a regional ocean partnership between Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, and New York, voluntarily convened by governors to address cross-jurisdictional matters. With that brief little introduction out of the way, I wanted to hit on a few housekeeping notes before we dive in. We are recording this webinar, and we'll be posting the recording to the Marco website after the event. So as usual, please stay muted throughout the webinar, something we're all pretty used to by now, but always good to double check. As with previous webinars in this series, there will be an opportunity for Q&A following the facilitated discussion portion. So feel free to drop your questions into the Zoom chat box at any time, and we'll circle back to them later in the program. This series is all about building collaboration, so we encourage you to say hello in the chat, share your name, organization, and where you're tuning in from. It's a great way to connect with others in the region who are working on or interested in marine debris issues, so please feel free to do that. Now, before we get started, I'd like to extend a big thank you, very, very big thank you, to the members of Marco's Marine Debris Work Group and our Microplastics fellow, Joseph Barnes. This group, and especially Joseph, put a lot of time, thought, and care into creating and shaping this series, which I'm sure you've been able to see with each webinar as we've moved through the three previous, and we'll get to this fourth one today. The Marine Debris Work Group itself is made up of state and federal agencies, as well as nonprofit partners, all working together toward a shared goal, bringing together regional stakeholders to collectively identify, understand, prevent, and mitigate the impacts of marine debris. So, since this is the fourth and final webinar, I want to give a little bit of background on how this webinar series came to be. As many of you know, Marco provides a regional forum for coordination and information sharing among ocean stakeholders in the Mid-Atlantic. And during the development of our current 5-year plan, stakeholders identified microplastics and microfibers as one of our top priority topics. However, it quickly became clear that there were still some important information gaps we needed to explore before we could really develop any effective outreach campaigns or on-the-ground initiatives. Around the same time, in talking with our research partners, we found that they were eager to share new findings and connect with practitioners and decision makers. So that's how this webinar series came to life. It's kind of a bridge between science and action. So you can watch those previous webinars and find more resources anytime on Marco's Marine Debris webpage, which Joe will drop into the chat. And so with that, figure we could summarize some of what we've learned so far. And so I'll now go through some of the key takeaways from those first 3 webinars. Our first webinar was focused on microfibers. And during that, we learned that microfibers are the most common type of microplastic and are virtually present everywhere. The field is also still in the awareness building phase with efforts like community-based social marketing aimed at connecting to and shifting everyday behaviors. And there's a lot of interest in policy solutions like laundry filters, but public support is still limited due to confusion about how these policies would work or what they mean. And as I already mentioned, the limited awareness on the issue overall. During our second webinar, we looked at microplastics and their movement through food webs. And there we learned that horseshoe crab eggs have been found to contain microplastics, sometimes even before being laid in sediment, which may affect the migratory shorebirds that feed on them. Mysid shrimp are key players in transferring microplastics up the food web, especially to younger striped bass. And then we also learned that research is showing overlap between microplastics presence and whale feeding zones, suggesting both direct and indirect ingestion pathways for baleen whales. In our last webinar, we looked at microplastics as environmental stressors. And what we learned there is that elevated sea surface temperatures and microplastics exposure together increase stress on mysid shrimp, altering their metabolism. Similarly, microplastics disrupt microbial communities in salt marshes and may act as co-stressors in fish disease and vulnerability. And for species like mud crabs, early life exposure to microplastics impacts development and energy use, which may ripple into fisheries and broader ecosystems. And this all highlights that sublethal or non-fatal effects are important to consider when looking at the impacts from microplastics. And one other thing I wanted to highlight that we learned during that webinar is that the toxic impacts of microplastics may be more related to the chemical additives in the plastics rather than the plastic polymers themselves. So all of this, what it tells us is that while we still need sustained field monitoring, we're ready to have a solid science base to inform policy. What we need now are collaborative cross-sector strategies and above all, upstream prevention and accountability. So that brings us to today's webinar, which focuses on exactly that. and why a microplastics webinar series is talking about policy and not about the actual little particles. So today we're going to be talking about producer responsibility and upstream solutions, including emerging state and federal policy efforts aimed at reducing plastic pollution at its source. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Steve Robbie. Steve is the founder of OpinionWorks, an independent, nonpartisan research firm that's been shaping conversations around sustainability, public health, and education since 2001. He's led perception studies for organizations across the country, including the Recycling Partnership, the Chesapeake Bay Program, and the Long Island Sound Partnership. Today, he measures public priorities for state and local agencies from Oregon to New York, is the principal author of the EPA's Chesapeake Bay Stewardship Index, and has been the public opinion pollster for the Baltimore Sun newspaper since 2007. The Marco Marine Debris Work Group has been lucky enough to work with Steve on a number of behavior change initiatives and perception studies. In fact, one of the recent projects he led for us engaged support for policies that address plastic pollution, and I think he'll be getting into that a little bit. It's kind of a tee up for today's discussion. Personally, I always appreciate Steve's ability to synthesize complex information and communicate it in a very productive way that's very approachable. And so with all that considered, I'm so pleased to welcome Steve Robbie as the moderator for our discussion today. Steve?
Thank you, Will. Thank you. I appreciate that introduction, and I'm really excited to be here on behalf of Marco. It's a great enterprise and doing a lot of great work. And so, thank you all for your time today. I'm going to start us off with a brief, I promise, brief presentation about public opinion because, grounded in policy is grounded in public opinion. And so we want to understand where the public is. And so we have a little bit of relevant work to talk with you about. The first thing to know, as we all know intuitively in our own lives, is that there is widespread worry about plastics in the environment out there at large in the nation. This result here that you see on the screen is from the regional survey that we conducted for Marco across the 5 states, New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia, early last year, April 24. It shows an 80% level of worry about plastics. In fact, on that same study, we put plastics in the ocean in a list alongside a number of other problems, some of them perennial and very worrisome environmental problems, such as climate change, which you can see here, but also things like inflation. It is striking. So the scale here is very serious, somewhat serious, which are the 2 points shown on the screen, plus not much of a problem or not a problem at all, or I'm not sure, which are not shown. And you see that plastic in the ocean is literally tied with inflation and the cost of living at a time when that is, as we all know, a preeminent issue in our politics. Plastics, this is not an it was a surprising result to me, but I will tell you it's not an exaggeration because anytime we do focus groups that relate to anything remotely environmental or health-wise, we are hearing about plastics. And it's something that's very much, and it's motivating to people. Here's an example. This is Carol. She lives in Williamsburg, Virginia. She participated in our study for Clean Virginia Waterways in 2022. She said, "It's very disturbing. I am concerned about plastic pollution in the water and elsewhere because it affects all the fish and wildlife and people. It's not good, and it's something that we really need to get a handle on because it's gotten to the critical point right now." And that's the view of many people out there in society. One of the key factors around all of this is people's worry about plastics being ingested by humans because they're infiltrating the food supply. And Will talked about this a minute ago based on some of the past webinar work that's been done. And these are quotes, from the same study. "Makes me feel kind of groggy, sick a little bit just to think about it. You just imagine yourself biting plastic and eating, and that doesn't feel right or good at all," says Edgar. "It's gross. It's sickening to know that," says Taylor. "I don't want to put that in my body. We are what we eat, and we're all interconnected. What we put into the ocean comes back to us." I will just say to all of you that one of the things that we always encounter with environmental messaging is that it's a bit altruistic. But the thing about plastics in the ocean or plastics in our environment around us is that people immediately make the connection to their own health, their kids' health, and the food supply. And so it's something that is highly motivating to the public. So what that translates into is um, support for the types of public policy initiatives that you're going to hear about today. So this also is from that Virginia study, a registered voter study in 2022 for clean Virginia waterways. We asked people if they would favor or oppose requiring manufacturers to use less plastic in product packaging. The overall favor number is 76%, so three-quarters of Virginians support this. There is a little bit of a partisan divide, but the differences are small. In fact, 69% of Republicans alongside 82% of Democrats support this. So, sure, there's a partisan differential, but there's a little more strength of support among Democrats, but two-thirds of Republicans support this. Everybody does. I mean, this is a cross-cutting issue. Here's another example of that from the regional Marco study across all five of the states, conducted in April 24. And the question here is, would people favor or oppose producer responsibility legislation, which requires producers of products to help pay for local recycling programs? And the support region-wide is 66. It's notable that when you go from adults to not just voters, but voters that are high likelihood voters, the support jumps up to 73. So people that are more tuned into the political process are more prone to support this particular measure. And by the way, on these plastics related measures, that pattern holds. I mean, the people that are more tuned in are more likely to be supportive of these policy measures. You wouldn't always know that based on the dialogue in our state legislatures, but it's true out there in the general public. And again, there are some partisan differences, but it's very cross-cutting with majorities and large majorities in all parties supporting this. If we look across our states at this question, the support is very consistent across all five states. It's two-thirds and more support this particular measure. So why is that people that are, well, environmentally minded, but also maybe more conservative or fiscally minded in their politics support this so strongly? Here's Michael, retired military living in Hampton, Virginia. It's time for producers to pay because they need to be involved also. You're producing all these things. You need to understand the necessity of making sure things get recycled. And as a taxpayer, I think it's about time we enforce some of these things for these producers so they can start picking up the slack. So for me, when I see companies and organizations making an effort, that encourages me to make an effort also. And so at the end there, he gives a little behavioral point that the example of corporate America, if they will do their part, it encourages individuals to also do their part, which is a theme that we hear over and over again. Finally, I'm just going to quickly go to California and just there's a Harris poll that came out. There's probably, I'm sure, been other polling on SB 54, which is their big EPR law that you're about to hear about. 81% in favor of the EPR law in January 25. It was signed into law in mid 22. So, Californians have had some time to hear about and think about this law, and it's very popular. I'll add this note from that same Harris poll of California voters. They were given a three-part, but really a two-part choice. Which of the following comes closer to your view? We must expand and improve recycling infrastructure and find ways to give new life to plastics that today's technology doesn't currently recycle. 63% take that view. We must eliminate single-use plastic and stop manufacturing new plastics. 27% take that view. Now, you could be glass half full or half empty, or however you want to look at these numbers, but there's a sizable minority, a quarter, that would just eliminate all single-use plastic. Admittedly, this is California, but it's a huge constituency. And for the people that are opting towards recycling, they're doing it with a caveat, which is to say that we have to improve the recycling technology that we have because it's not working well enough. The Recycling Partnership, a national NGO, is one of our most active clients. I mean, we work with them constantly across the country in different communities. We created with them and for them this Recycling Confidence Index in 2022. We're about to update it this fall. And one of its 10 measures is the belief or not that the things we recycle actually get made into new things. And only half of Americans believe that it always or usually is the case. And in focus groups, a lot of active recyclers say, I'm recycling based on hope. I hope it works. I hope things are getting recycled. The change that we're going to make in the Recycling Confidence Index this fall is we're going to ask about plastics specifically alongside cardboard, aluminum, and other commodities. And so we'll see what happens. But we all know that confidence in plastics recycling is much lower. which drives us to want to improve that process, but also drive towards reduction measures, upstream measures that we're talking about today. So I hope I haven't taken too long, but I thought that would provide a nice foundation for the discussion that we're about to have. And of course, on this and all things, we will welcome your questions. Um, so moving forward, I am now pleased to introduce our first speaker, Angela Noakes. Angela is a plastics policy analyst at Ocean Conservancy, where she focuses on both state and federal policy solutions to prevent plastic pollution. Angela leads efforts to reduce waste from single-use plastic, promote producer accountability, and address microplastics across systems. Before joining Ocean Conservancy, Angela served as the Associate Director of U.S. Policy Development at the Wildlife Conservation Society's Washington, D.C. office. There, she supported research, policy analysis, and development across a wide range of domestic and international issues. Angela earned her JD from the University of Washington in Seattle and holds bachelor's degrees in environmental management and government from the University of Redlands in California. Angela, take it away.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to work on sharing my screen. All right, can someone give me a nod if you're seeing my slides?
Looks great.
Awesome, thank you. All right, well, thanks so much for having me here today. I'm Angela Noakes. I'm a plastics policy analyst at Ocean Conservancy, and I'm here to talk about our approach to tackling plastic pollution through comprehensive extended producer responsibility. So to give you a quick introduction to Ocean Conservancy, we work to protect the ocean from today's greatest global challenges. To accomplish this, we create evidence-based solutions for a healthy ocean and the wildlife and communities that depend on it. Our work focuses on addressing three of the biggest challenges facing our ocean: tackling climate change, protecting biodiversity, and stopping plastic pollution. In our plastics policy work, which is my focus at Ocean Conservancy, our goal is to prevent plastics from becoming pollution in the first place. To accomplish that, we focus on reducing or eliminating the most highly polluting forms of plastics, like plastic bags or microplastics, reducing the amount of plastics we make and use, and working on holding producers financially accountable for improving and redesigning our reuse and recycling system through policies like extended producer responsibility. Before I dive into EPR, I want to talk a little bit about, hold on, a little technical problem. All right, before we dive into EPR, I want to talk a bit about Ocean Conservancy's new United States of Plastics report, which gives a national snapshot of plastics policies in the US. We just released this last month, and it gives each state and DC a score based on laws they've enacted to address plastic pollution. In terms of the policies we looked at in this report, we looked across the four categories that you'll see on this slide. We looked at single-use plastics policies, policies to address microplastics, reduction and reuse, and producer accountability and recycling. We also considered recycling access and recycling rate in those scores. This map shows the overall results, and the report has more detail for every state, but overall the results of this analysis were disappointing but not surprising. The national average score was 1.5 stars or needs improvement, which you'll see on the scale on the map here, and nearly 90% of states are falling short of the good level on that scale. The 5 states participating in MARCO, New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia, ranged from 1.5 to 3 stars, so we have seen some progress in this region above the national average. Overall, across the country, we've seen that although states have proven to be leaders in passing laws to reduce plastic pollution, there's a lot more work to be done. Given the focus of this webinar, I wanted to highlight some of what we found when we reviewed state microplastics and producer accountability laws. Nationwide, one of the biggest opportunities for improvement that we found was microplastics. Although we've seen some states starting to research them with an eye towards future action, this is a newer area for state policymaking, and we're hoping to see more policy action in this area over the next few years. On the other side of the slide, we have producer accountability, which is one of the areas where we've seen the most action recently. Just since 2022, 7 states have passed EPR laws for packaging. Approximately 20% of Americans live in states that have passed an EPR for packaging law, and 5 of those laws have requirements for reuse and/or reduction targets as part of their EPR laws. For those who may not be familiar with EPR, the details of these laws vary from state to state, but in general, these laws are looking to shift the financial burden of waste management for packaging from ratepayers and local governments to producers, and also include targets to improve the recycling system and achieve other outcomes as identified in each individual law. 10 states also have deposit return programs for beverage containers. These are also called bottle bills, and these programs require deposit paid with the purchase of a beverage container that is then returned to the consumer when the beverage container is returned for recycling or reuse at a redemption site. Many of these programs in the US are longstanding, and despite representing over just a quarter of the country, these programs are responsible for about 50% of aluminum can and glass bottle recycling and 60% of all PET bottles recycled. The second resource I want to talk about was Ocean Conservancy's Toolkit on Comprehensive Extended Producer Responsibility. This toolkit outlines a comprehensive approach to EPR to help achieve the best environmental outcomes and effectively address plastic pollution through EPR. We think of it as EPR for the ocean. And the toolkit includes a short report that describes the comprehensive EPR approach. So if you're not familiar with EPR, this is a great place to start. It gives a quick overview, a model state bill, section by section for that model state bill, so you don't have to dive right into all the details, and an appendix that has timelines and FAQs and a lot of other resources. So what do we mean by comprehensive EPR? The comprehensive EPR policy that we describe in our toolkit combines source reduction for single-use plastics, EPR for packaging, and deposit return systems for beverage containers. By combining these three approaches, we aim to drive better environmental outcomes and more effectively address plastic pollution. We know that recycling alone is not going to address the scale of plastic pollution that we're facing, and that's why source reduction for single-use plastics is a key part of our comprehensive EPR approach. We need to make and use less single-use plastics, and incorporating source reduction to comprehensive EPR can help drive environmental outcomes through product redesign and scaling up reuse systems. In addition to source reduction, this policy approach implements extended producer responsibility for packaging and paper products, and that includes fee structures and measurable performance standards that will drive environmental outcomes. And finally, our approach includes a deposit return system, also called a bottle bill. These programs lead to more beverage containers being returned for recycling than through curbside collection and have been found to reduce littered packaging, which is especially important not only in reducing overall plastic pollution, but when we think about pollution from secondary microplastics, which brings us back to the theme of this webinar series. As part of our toolkit, we have a model state bill that combines all of these elements into one comprehensive policy. For the purposes of the time, I'm just going to have a quick snapshot, but there's a lot more detail on this in our toolkit. So some of the key points on source reduction are this model legislation has a target of 25% reduction in single-use plastics, as well as targets for reuse. It also includes a plastic pollution mitigation fund that's funded by an annual combined contribution from PROs to address the impacts of plastics on communities, human health, and the environment, including the impacts of microplastics. The EPR program for packaging is material inclusive, so it includes all paper and packaging products. It includes upstream redesign requirements to ensure that packaging is recyclable, reusable, or compostable, and it has provisions to address toxic substances in packaging as well. It also has performance standards for recycling, reuse, and minimum post-consumer recycled content requirements. The DRS program is also material inclusive and would have a 10-cent deposit for beverage containers. It also includes performance standards that focus on redemption rates, reuse, recycling, post-consumer recycled content, and convenience for redemption. Both of these, the EPR and DRS program, would have associated producer responsibility organizations, which have various responsibilities outlined in the legislation. In building this toolkit, we also assembled 10 key principles for effective EPR to tackle the plastic pollution crisis, which are available at the QR code that I'm going to share on the next screen. And that'll give a quick guide or reference when reviewing whether an EPR policy will have the environmental outcomes you're looking for. So here on this last screen, I just wanted to share QR codes to two of the resources that I talked about here, as well as two others that I didn't get a chance to talk about but seemed relevant to this audience. So at the top, we have our comprehensive EPR toolkit. So that's what I just talked about. And then we also have our United States of Plastics report. And then at the bottom, we have our Fibers to Filters toolkit that we developed with partners that discusses washing machine microfiber filtration as a solution or a tool to address that source of microfiber pollution. And then our Plastics Policy 101 report, which is a primer on the plastic pollution crisis and key policy solutions. So everything from eliminating problematic and unnecessary plastics to reducing microplastic pollution and EPR and DRS. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Angela. Thank you very much. Next, I'm happy to welcome Matt Gove. Matt has worked in coastal management for over 20 years with organizations including the Surfrider Foundation, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, and the New York Department of Environmental Conservation. He currently serves as the Mid-Atlantic Policy Manager at Surfrider Foundation. Matt holds a master's degree in coastal environmental management from Duke University. Matt, take it away.
Okay. Thanks, Steve. Looks like it's working. Thanks for joining today, folks. I'm tasked with giving kind of the local vibe on plastic policy in the Mid-Atlantic, so I will get there. Let's see if I can move my slides. Here we go. If you've never heard of Surfrider, we're kind of the beach and ocean people. Super grassroots. We've got over 80 chapters across the country, so not just the Mid-Atlantic. And all these chapters are real people and almost all volunteers. And we work on almost everything on the coast, not just plastics. So remember that when you ask your difficult EPR questions, which I will probably ask Angela to answer. So why is a surfing group working on extended producer responsibility, which, as you saw from Angela's slides, gets very complicated very quickly and very manufacturing focused and waste management focused? The answer is that we do a ton of cleanups. Some people think Surfrider only does cleanups. We do a lot more than that, but we do about 1,500 cleanups every year around the country. So we've been on the beach picking up trash, and our folks, 10, 15 years ago, even before I started in 2013, were saying, hey, we're picking up tons of plastic. We have to do something about it. So I'll give you a little bit of a history to see how we got here. I hope other folks agree that this is the history, but most groups like ours started on single item laws, bag laws, straw laws, foam, foodware, balloons, cigarettes, and there's been a lot of success there. There's still things ongoing, but that's kind of where the plastic fight started, from my perspective. And we have a great website that has all these local ordinances for that kind of single item law. So check that out. I'll put that in the chat when I'm done. It's really helpful. It's for the whole country. And some of that stuff is still going on. You might have heard of Skip the Stuff. That's a kind of a newer policy, but it's going after takeout food and delivery food. So that kind of stuff is still happening, as well as construction dust pollution, which is a very new issue that people become aware of, and we've been working on in New Jersey. That's not snow, sadly. That's plastic. So we're working on all these single item plastic laws, but we realized it wasn't enough. And, for those that have been around, we didn't talk much about human health at the beginning of this fight because we didn't know about it. And the science has really caught up, and we've seen how we're finding plastics all throughout our body, obviously finding it all throughout the environment, and then recently finding out of the bad health effects to humans from plastic. So we knew we had to go bigger, and so we looked towards EPR laws. There's been other EPR programs, batteries, carpet, paint, that have been around longer, but EPR for packaging, which is really what we're talking about today, is a newer idea, like Angela mentioned. So we've jumped in on EPR for packaging bills and bottle bills, which are basically a kind of an EPR bill. And our bottle bills are really back, which I'll show you on a chart I have of the states in the region. But these EPR bills are trying to truly get us to that circular economy. You know, we want to have the least amount of raw materials and virgin materials coming into the system. And that's, you know, what we're really talking about today is virgin plastic. Right now, we're barely recycling any plastic. It's almost all virgin is coming into the system. Uh, and where does it go at the end? You know, the 10% that's being recycled, the 90% is being landfilled or incinerated. So these bills are trying to get us out of that system of constant inputs of virgin material and outputs of garbage and into a real circular economy. I think I was surprised I had this number right, Angela. So we both said 7 bills have passed. That's exciting. Surfrider has supported the Maine EPR for packaging bill, which I believe was the first, and the Washington bill, which I think was the latest. So we've already seen that. And the industry response, you know, basically the plastics industry is the oil and gas industry. I think they've seen the writing on the wall, which is interesting and gives you some hope, but also because they saw the writing on the wall, there's kind of 2 flavors of bills out there. And Angela went through really the good kind, but the industry has also been shopping their own bill, and they have infinite money, so they've been going to every state in the country to get those passed. And so I'll put down, you know, this is very generalized because these EPR bills are very long and very complicated, but so kind of the general industry bill is really focused on number one. They're like, okay, we see the writing on the wall. We will pay for the disposal and recycling, mostly disposal of our products. We will pay municipalities to do this. So, you know, that's great, especially from a taxpayer kind of perspective. Okay, that's great. But they don't really want to do much more than that. They don't really want to stop making plastics. They don't want to make less kinds of plastics, which would be really helpful for recycling. They kind of want to keep doing the same thing, but they're like, okay, we'll pay for the disposal of our products. So that's the kind of bill they're pushing. The kind of bill that groups like us are pushing, and I believe Angela's bill is that kind of a bill. I haven't looked at it. Sorry, Angela. I will do that after today. But our real main goal in our bills is to reduce waste and increase recycling. Like I said, there was that circular economy. You want to reduce the waste going out of it, and you want to reduce the amount of virgin materials coming in. So that's really our goal in our bills. It also has, you know, funding for municipalities, but so they're pretty different. And it's been a big fight, and it's been a big fight here in the Mid-Atlantic. We've actually been kind of a locus of EPR packaging bills, which I'll get into a little bit here. And this just shows you how complicated the bills are. This is kind of a generalized sections of an EPR bill. So once again, but really what we're trying to do is we're trying to get manufacturers to make their products more recyclable. You've probably received both the Amazon Prime bags that are plastic and the Amazon Prime bags that are cardboard recyclable. Why do I get both kinds? I have no idea, but we're trying to get companies to switch to more recyclable material and also just less packaging. I got a box in the mail the other day. I probably could have fit 50 of the product that I received. I probably could have fit 50 of those in the size of the box they sent me. So it's more recyclable products, packaging products, and just less. We want to see less of the packaging. You know, you'll get a product and there's 6 layers of plastic in it. It's crazy. I recently just started using the paper version of Burt's Bees chapstick, and it works great. So these are kind of examples of what we're looking at. I think a lot of people, they hear EPR for packaging and then they think, well, what does that mean? So it's nice to try to give some examples of what we're talking about. I was in Mexico City a couple of years ago. They still got returnable glass bottles, and that's a part of EPR as well. Let's get back to some of that returnable stuff. So what's going on here in the Mid-Atlantic? This is, I'm sure, not the full picture, but as we mentioned, Maryland did pass an EPR for packaging bill last year. New York and New Jersey have bills introduced. New York's bill came very close to passing, millimeters close. There was actually a lot of media coverage of that and the pointing of fingers afterwards why that didn't pass. And then there's a ton of bottle bills in the Mid-Atlantic, which is encouraging. And then I put them at the bottom because they're not the main focus of this talk, but skip the stuff bills, which I mentioned before, are happening, and construction dust is kind of a new thing. It's just in New Jersey. So that gives you a picture. There's a lot happening with plastics in the Mid-Atlantic, and these New York and New Jersey bills are really good EPR for packaging bills. And I'll leave you here. I have no idea how much time I've taken, but here's some of the main details. There's a ton more details of these two bills, but these are good bills, and you can see what they would do. 50% reduction in 10 years. I mean, that would be amazing. 30% reduction, that would be amazing. Getting all these harmful chemicals out of the packaging. You know, our food is in this packaging. So let's get the chemicals out of it. I will leave you there. Thanks so much, y'all, and we can answer questions later.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you. Before I introduce the final speaker, actually a team of two that are going to speak to us in a moment, I just remind everybody you can populate the chat with your questions. Joe is monitoring that. We'll go to questions here in a few minutes. And so as your thoughts are bubbling, please type things into the chat so that we've got some good discussion coming next. Well, so our final presenters today are Bradley Baker and Sarah Weitzel from MD, the Maryland Department of the Environment. Bradley Baker is a third-generation environmental regulator and a program manager at the Maryland Department of the Environment, or MDE. His team is implementing packaging and paper products EPR in the state of Maryland. He received both his BS in Sustainability and MBA at Arizona State University. Prior to working at MDE, he worked at the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality, most recently managing executive-level projects. Sarah Weitzel is a natural resources planner with MDE in the Waste Diversion Division. Her work supports the Resource Recovery Plan for Maryland, including food residual diversion, recycling market development, and extended producer responsibility laws. She received her BS in Environmental Science and Management from the University of California, Davis. So I will hand it over to the two of you.
Good morning, everyone. So happy to be here. Let me just try to share once more.
We see your slides.
Great. Okay. Excellent. Okay, so I am going to be talking about Maryland's packaging and paper product extended producer responsibility law specifically. And so to start us off, I just wanted to tie together some of the specific things that tie into this microplastics discussion that came out of this law. So firstly, our law has specific plastics reduction goals and aims to minimize the environmental and human health impacts of packaging, including by reducing the amount of packaging, especially plastic packaging, that's sold in the state. So it specifically calls out plastic packaging in our law, and reducing packaging waste. And so these goals help prevent plastic from entering the environment in the first place, where they could then eventually break down into microplastics in systems where they are not managed. And then under this law, producers also provide reimbursements to service providers for covered services. And so one application is that a potential recipient of reimbursements could be community cleanups or other cleanup events that specifically separate out and recycle those recyclable materials. And that piece of the law can also address some of the existing plastic litter that is in the environment, and once again, could eventually end up as microplastic contamination. So I'd just like to give first an overview of how we've reached the place that we're at now. So starting in 2023, SB 222 was enacted, and SB 222 established the Advisory Council. It required a needs assessment, and it defined some key terms it also required the selection of a producer responsibility organization. And to begin, SB 22 actually had a lot more language, and a lot of that language was taken out of the law in favor of completing this needs assessment first to inform potential future legislation. So then in 2024, the needs assessment began. And in 2025, the needs assessment was published prior to the enactment of SB 901, which is our full extended producer responsibility for packaging and paper products, extended producer responsibility law. So that needs assessment was published, the law was enacted, and this law expanded on some of those key terms and definitions and other components of the law. And all of this leads to this first step in the implementation of this law, which is the 2026 July 1st deadline for producer responsibility organization registration and the establishment of any potential alternative collection programs. And this step here is where we are currently. So rulemaking will begin shortly, and we're currently developing draft regulations, which will be open for public comment in the near future. So one of those first steps in establishing and working toward this law was the establishment of the Advisory Council. And the Advisory Council had, and I believe still does have, 21 members, for which there was specific criteria that was outlined in SB 222, that first law. And I'm not going to read through all of them, but they are listed here. And continue a bit onto this page. And essentially, these criteria establish that there needs to be diversity within the stakeholders who are representing and making up that council. So that included environmental advocacy groups, that included industry, that included members of the public, etc. And with the passage of SB 901, there was an update made that removed the limit on the number of advisory council members that can join. So we've actually we've actually received some applications there that we're currently reviewing. So that 21 may change in the near future. And then additionally, there was a non-voting seat established for the Department of the Environment and for the Producer Responsibility Organization. So initially, the Advisory Council, when established, had the following responsibilities. They were established to make recommendations, to provide advice, and to report to the General Assembly. And so these are the topics that they provided recommendations on in a letter to the General Assembly. And I, once again, will not go through all of these, but I'm happy to share these slides if you'd like to give this a deeper dive. And since then, since that work concluded, SB 901 established some new roles for the Advisory Council. And so they now additionally consult on producer responsibility plans, annual reports, future needs assessments, etc. And then lastly, I will touch on some of the work that was done in the legislative session. So this was a significant collaborative effort, and there was collaboration between the legislature and a diverse group of stakeholders was actually convened in Annapolis to work through that law, which just speaks to the collaborative effort that occurred. And also, as mentioned before, the Advisory Council submitted their recommendations to the General Assembly. The needs assessment was also provided, which I didn't list here. And then the Department of the Environment provided a fiscal note. We provided an agency explanation of impact. And also, we provided testimony, as did many of the Advisory Council members and other stakeholders. And so finally, we are at present moment, once again, we're working on developing draft regulations, and those are going to be very focused on getting us to where we need to be for that July 1st key deadline of producer responsibility registration and the development of an alternative collection program. And then after that, there are many steps to program implementation, and I've outlined some of those here. The next one being that we need to establish the recyclable, compostable curbside covered materials list. But this, goes all the way out into 2034. So there is much left to do. And then on this last slide here, I just wanted to share some resources. So we do have advisory council meetings that occur on the second Thursday of each month. They are public meetings. They can be found, bringing me to the next bullet point, on our EPR webpage, the information, and on the state calendar as well. But there is a section of those meetings that is reserved for public comment. So we welcome all public comment then. And we also have an email list. So if you're interested in joining that, you can send an email to this email that I've listed here. And then finally, here are the links to SB 222 and SB 901, which are those two relevant pieces of legislation. And that is all that I have for now. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Sarah. And will Bradley be offering any comments at this time?
Yeah, I can chime in a little bit. So one thing to note is, since we already conducted our needs assessment, even though we passed our EPR law after some of the other states, we're actually a couple of years ahead of states like Minnesota, which is just starting on their needs assessment. So, I mean, we're at the stage where we're going to be registering folks next year in July, and so just wanted to point that out a little bit. In some ways, we're actually further along than some of the other states, and yeah, just wanted to point that out, and looking forward to the Q&A.
Great, thanks, Bradley. Good to hear about the situation in Maryland, and good to know how things are progressing here. So thanks to all of the panelists. We're now going to move into a little bit more of a discussion. And as we launch into this, I'd like to invite our panelists to ask questions of each other, or, if there's anything that you heard in other people's presentations here this morning that you want to riff on or ask about, or that struck you. We'd be curious about that. So, panelists, any thoughts from you about others, or any questions you want to ask of each other?
I'll just ask a very technical question because I forgot. In the Maryland bill, do you guys at MD, were you given more FTEs or funding to do all this new work? I sure hope so.
So, Sarah, I can take that one. In our uh, in our fiscal note, which we provided, we asked for 4 people. The state is currently under a hiring freeze at this point, so we are pulling from current resources for right now. So we have not been able to get additional resources for this.
Well, that shouldn't be a problem for you, right? You can handle all this.
Well, I mean, I've heard Oregon has a team of 12 people, and they just have one person who answers questions from CAA, clarifications and stuff like that. So we're very eager to get those folks at this point. Um,
And
and
CAA is their producer responsibility organization,
yes,
correct?
correct.
Yeah.
And they are
Yeah.
ours as well. And some of the other states, there's a little bit of an open question in Maine, I believe, because they have the stewardship organization, but I would imagine CAA is going to put in a bid for that as well.
So
Um,
go ahead. Sorry, Brad. Go ahead.
yeah, and I did also want to point out that our law does include paper products as well. Um, so we have a little bit larger scope. Some of the other states do have that as well. And I know uh, our law doesn't explicitly talk about the toxics, but we already have laws that address that, which we're going to be integrating into this legislation. So just because you don't see like that necessarily in this legislation doesn't mean that it does not exist. Uh, so we're and we also have a styrofoam ban for certain products as well, which we're going to be implementing or integrating, I should say, as well.
Donna Morrow's asked a question that I will ask you and sort of modify or add to, and that is she's asking what types of packaging are being addressed in Maryland. And I would like to sort of ask you additionally, what's it going to be like? I know none of us has the crystal ball about EPR, but let's go out to 2034. I mean, what do we imagine the Maryland consumer is going to see that's different from what we have today?
Yeah. So as you know, it's very early in the process, and our plan is due to us in 2028. But what I'm excited about is we're going to have a major focus is on reuse infrastructure. That was one of our amendments to the bill was adding reuse basically everywhere where you see the term recycling. So we wanted to make sure that we were including the reuse side as well, because you have the terms of reduce, reuse, recycle. Got to reuse before you recycle. And just in terms of the chapstick, I don't use chapstick, so I have reduced my use of that product as well. So uh, yeah, we are also going to have millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars of reimbursement for the service providers. Some of the states, I believe, limit that just to municipalities, but ours is not necessarily limited to municipalities. So we would also be reimbursing the private sector that takes part in those activities as well. Just know, according to our needs assessment, I think it's like something like 25% of our of collection in the state for recycling is done through a subscription model, which is a very large part of the recycling infrastructure. And in the more rural parts of the state, we wanted to make sure that they had access to some of those same services, because it doesn't make sense to necessarily do 100% curbside. We do have some pretty rural areas in our state, but can we expand other types of recycling infrastructure in there as well? And according to our needs assessment, although we don't have the same scope as the needs assessment, we expect thousands of jobs in this space to be produced as a result of what's going on. So pretty excited in terms of that.
Lots of potential. All right, I want to ask a question. I'm going to go to Angela first, and then others can jump in, other panelists, if you'd like. To the extent you have a national perspective, Angela, and I'm curious, there are policies like bottle bills that we've talked about this morning, plastic bag bans, other forms of producer responsibility legislation. What are you seeing as the greatest opportunities for states to be thinking about policy-wise, and where are the gaps that we need to fill in? So opportunities like what's the next thing? that we should all be thinking about and pushing forward? And second, kind of the gaps, or, what do we need as colleagues, advocates, and others to be helping push forward? So what thoughts might you have about that?
Yeah, thanks for that question. This is one of the things that we looked at in our United States of Plastics report. So looking at that, the biggest policy gaps we found nationwide were on microplastics and reuse and reduction. And we talk about reuse and reduction in particular, we're talking about taking up steps to scale up reuse systems and creating more systemic and coordinated reuse, and then also, writ large, reducing the amount of plastics that we make and use. So that's kind of the nationwide, like looking across all of the states. That said, the results of that report were that there's a lot of room for improvement across the board, and every state was going to have its own areas for improvement. No state got 5 stars in this report because no state has enacted all the policies that we were looking at. And we looked across, all the policy things you just talked about, right? Single-use plastics, producer accountability, microplastics. So one of our goals in developing that report was to create the snapshot of what states have done so far, and then to identify some of those policy gaps and see them continue to take action. So I think the answer is there's a lot of improvement across all of these, and it's going to depend on each state, right? What makes most sense for them and their situation and where those gaps are.
Okay, absolutely. Anybody else on the panel want to jump in on this?
I would just say, like I mentioned, there's been a huge improvement in the public's perception, and Steve hit this right on the head of the plastic problem. When I started working, most people didn't know about the plastics pollution issue. So that's been great, but I still think there's a lot of dots to connect. I don't think people think about, oh, my food is in a plastic container and there's lots of toxic materials in there. They don't think about that packaging and connect it to microplastics and stuff in their body. So I think there's still that jump. And then the gap that's been so helpful and is still being met is from all the health research. And that stuff coming out has been so helpful because for years we just assumed it's probably bad to have plastics in your body, but we didn't know. And now it is coming out that it is bad to have plastics in your body, but we need more of that. So I think as that comes out, that'll be so helpful to get support to really try to finally tackle this problem.
I'll just add on to what Matt just said. One of the surprising findings in that Virginia study that I talked about, we just offhandedly in those in-depth interviews asked people, hey, what's plastic made from? And it was shocking that people did not know that petroleum is the main ingredient. And they didn't understand that that's the sourcing. And when we informed them, did you know that plastic is sourced from petroleum, that people were like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? So it was profoundly impactful in terms of their thoughts about that. First of all, from a scarcity standpoint, oil is a scarce commodity. Should we be making all this plastic when we have, this scarcity issue? But then there was also, of course, that's gross. I put my food in plastic containers and really, so that surprised me. I mean, I think that finding, I thought everybody would be aware of kind of where plastic comes from, but you'd be surprised at what people don't know. And so I think that that is one of those things that we could do some messaging on that would probably be helpful in terms of moving public opinion further. From the chat, there's an interesting question, and I will say parenthetically, I think this is coming from Virginia, if I'm right, which is how do we help promote less plastic packaging if we can't pass laws yet? So, can't pass laws yet. I assume that the context there is we've got a legislature that's not totally tuned into this stuff, and maybe the politics aren't quite right in our state. So, what advice do you all have for states where the politics aren't really lining up yet and they want to move some things forward? Bradley?
Yeah, so Sarah actually mentioned our advisory council. We had some pretty intense conversations, but in the recommendations that she talked about, many of those we had uh, we had 100% consensus or one person voting no on those items. And so that in those recommendations, we had environmental groups, we had industry, we had counties, we had haulers all voting for those recommendations, and many of those recommendations actually got into our law as well. So we really only had one industry who did not support the law. There was a few others, but there was one big one. But there was a lot of uh, folks that were supportive of this law, and that conversation is healthy. Um, and uh, and nobody got 100% of what they wanted. But the fact is that we're going to have millions of dollars of investment in the state, tens of millions of dollars of investment in the state, and thousands of jobs in this space. And that is a huge win for the citizens in the state of Maryland.
Okay. Good thoughts there. Anybody else want to jump in on the kind of this question of what if my state's not quite ready to pass stuff?
I mean, I would just say it's tough. As being a consumer, it's tough. You don't have a lot of options, you know. If you need a product and it's only coming in tons of plastic, that's not your fault. And that's the whole point of these bills, is that it's really on these companies to change their ways. But it sounds cheesy to say contact these companies, but you see it happening and you see it working when people are getting concerned about plastics. Companies are starting to try to reduce on their own. So doing that, and also look for reuse stores. Those are starting to pop up across states in the Mid-Atlantic. They try to get all things that are reusable or low packaging. So just Google reuse store and see if you can find somewhere that sells stuff with less packaging.
Good thoughts. Yes, for sure. Consumer power. Okay, I'm going to invite Will in if you're willing, Will, to be part of this conversation for a second. But, thinking about the Mid-Atlantic Ocean Data Portal, which is a tool with strong potential to support regional marine debris work. You know a lot about it, aggregates data, visualizes hotspots. Everybody should look at it. We should link it in the chat, whoever can do that. But how might we begin using tools like that more strategically? Do you have thoughts about that? I don't mean to put you on the spot, Will, but I figure you might have some thoughts, but others might too. What types of data are missing, underutilized? And how can these gaps be addressed so that we can better support policy development?
Yeah, great question. It's something we're thinking about as a work group, is how can we better use that? And for folks who are unfamiliar, it again is just this mapping application online, like many of the applications that you see out there, but it's been really, really well used in ocean planning and working among ocean resource users to kind of see what's happening in different places, how things overlap, how they interact, how they change through time. And so thinking about data layers around marine debris and just trash in general, how that could be used on there is something we're trying to explore. So I don't have any specific answers. We certainly welcome ideas there, but one example could be laying out the plastic pollution, or sorry if I'm butchering the title, but the plastics, the United States of Plastics. There we go. Laying out those kind of scores across there and linking information to that report so people can follow up and understand what's going on there. Another thing could be just kind of what Matt shared about the different policies in the different states and what's being worked on there. That's just from a policy side of things. We could also look at where hot spots are. I know EPA released maybe last year a modeled summary of trash that kind of escapes our waste containment, and where those hot spots are there. That could be put up there as well. And all of that could be used not only just to know the problem that we already know and know the solutions that we're already talking about here, but it can be used as a communication tool for decision makers or other partners that you're working with to say, hey, this is kind of the lay of the landscape. This is what it looks like for our region. How does that make you feel? So those are just some general thoughts, but like I said, as a work group, we're thinking about it and trying to get some feedback on that. So if folks have ideas and want to throw it in the chat, or any of the panelists have any things they'd like to share, certainly invite that as well.
Yeah, any panelists want to weigh in on the data issue, data gaps, or where we should be going there?
Yeah, I can say, I think it's great to hear Marco thinking about this and how your database can be used in this way. Happy to talk further, but through our international coastal cleanup and the tides database from all of those years of data, we've seen the value of gathering that data on plastic pollution and how it can help inform the public and policymakers and better target policy solutions. So I think it's a great idea and always happy to talk more and connect you with our team that works on that.
Great. And let me remind you now that we have 10 minutes left. We still have some time for discussion. These are great questions. If you have a question, put it in that chat so that we can try to get to it. Here's one that came in. It says, my question is about cigarette butt litter and EPR. What is being done on the state and federal levels about tobacco litter?
I was just writing a reply that's in the chat to that.
Yeah.
Not a lot of work federally or state that I know of, but butt collectors have been shown to be very effective at litter and bans on smoking in beaches and parks. But for EPR, EPR would only cover the actual packaging. It wouldn't do anything for the litter of used cigarettes.
Yeah, and I'll just add is that's one of the policies addressing litter from cigarette butts is one of the things that we looked at in the United States of Plastic. So there's a little more information in the report on that because it's such a huge issue.
Okay. All right, here's an interesting question. Again, I think from the chat, but are there any concerns that if we meet goals of source reduction, that funding will decline or disappear for some things that are currently being funded through these revenue streams? Think about plastic bag fees, for example, that might be funding cleanup efforts. And if we eliminate the plastic bags successfully or dramatically reduce, that funding stream goes away. So does anybody have thoughts about that kind of funding stream issue?
Well, I mean, hopefully, if you're reducing your bag fees, then you're having less bags to clean up in the environment, which has been shown to happen with bag bills. They've shown that there's less bags out as litter once you get those good bag bills in. So you shouldn't need as much money to go clean them up. I think as far as like recycling centers and those jobs, sadly, I think we're a long way off from a reduction in materials going there. So I don't think if I had a job at a recycling center, I'd be too worried. This issue has come up with bottle bills. Those recycling centers are worried, and they think they're going to see a reduction in materials, but studies have shown that doesn't really happen because they do get some less materials, but at the same time, they also have to collect less materials, so they have less work to do, and they get much better product to sell. So they're kind of money's kind of moving around in there, but it's not they're not seeing a loss in revenue.
Okay. Bradley, you want to jump in on this? You're muted.
You would think after all these years after COVID, I would learn to unmute myself. And as Sarah knows, this happens more often than not. But as Sarah pointed out in our presentation, we think that there's actually a way to fund cleanups with EPR. Reimbursable activities are collecting. So if you're paying people to collect litter off the side of the road, that is collecting. Sorting. If you're paying those same people to sort in the green bag or the blue bag or the black bag, like those could be different opportunities. And at least one of our counties, I believe, was doing that. They had different bags. So, I mean, we're going to be starting conversations with our counties on that potential, with our state highways as well. Maryland is one of the few states, I believe, that actually has a trash TMDL for two of our reaches. So this is a very important topic in the state of Maryland, and we think there's actually a way where we can get those activities funded, even if and we don't have a statewide bag ban or anything like that as well. But we do believe that there could be a funding source.
Okay, good. All right, thank you. We got 5 minutes left, and this could be our summative question. We'll see. But I just want to ask our panelists to think about this. So thinking about the Mid-Atlantic region, thinking about the work of Marco's Marine Debris Work Group, which Will was just talking about, Are there any specific opportunities for collaboration that you want to flag for this audience? So, if you were running the work group, or if you were kind of making trouble here in the Mid-Atlantic, which some of you are, what's on your wish list? Are there areas where you're actively looking for new research partners, new data, new policy support, community engagement to move efforts forward? What are you thinking about? Is that too big a question? Come on, people.
I mean, for me, anything that helps explain EPR to the public would be so helpful because it's very opaque, it's very confusing. That's why I try to add those simple slides of this is what we're trying to do. Big box becomes small box, like because people just don't get it. So anything on that level, I don't know exactly what that would look like, but we've come a long way, like I said, on people's perception of the plastic pollution problem. But as far as the EPR next step, I'd say most people have no idea about EPR.
Okay, very practical. Angela, what do you think about this question?
Yeah, I think one thing that our team thinks about a lot is helping pull together resources and lessons learned from across the country. So policymakers and stakeholders in one state might not be aware what's happening in another. And so there's a lot of opportunities to learn about what's happened, best practices, hopefully stories of success, and also, how to address challenges. And so that's, one thing that we've been really thinking about is pulling those thoughts together. And, we've seen states in the Mid-Atlantic taking action on plastics, but there's still a lot more work to be done. So we'd be really interested to talk to others who are working in this space on how we can bring together some of that information to make it more accessible to people.
All right. And Bradley and Sarah, any thoughts from you about collaborative opportunities or what's on your wish list?
I'll let Sarah go first this time, and then I'll jump in.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so earlier we talked about using different data layers, visualizing data, and so really any research on relationships between microplastics and recycling systems, things like that, I think could be very useful for us to share with counties to help their educational efforts around recycling. So that's one space that I think would be helpful from our perspective, would be data that we could share with counties that's visualized and easy to share.
Okay. Bradley, closing thoughts.
Yeah. So I think one of the big things that we wanted in this legislation was having commercial packaging in scope. Unfortunately, we didn't get that. But we do believe that paper products is in scope for the commercial side, just based off of the language. And paper products, or paper in general, is 26% of our waste stream, according to our needs assessment. It is as high as organics. I know we're talking about plastics here, but in terms of paper products, that's a big win. But expanding to commercial in the future would be something that would be very interested on the packaging side. And then just as a note, you have to be willing to compromise. I think that was definitely a big lesson in the advisory council that I learned, and because the result is, again, I keep bringing this up, we're going to have tens of millions of dollars of investment in the state, and we are going to get thousands of jobs in the recycling and reuse space, since that is going to be a huge component of this. And in some of the other states that are passing this legislation, they're getting hung up on some other topics. And I think it's a little bit more important to get your foot in the door, because just those two items are very critical and are going to save our taxpayers a boatload of money as well. So just because you're compromising doesn't mean that you're necessarily compromising on the environment as well.
All right.
Because no action is also not good. So just want to
No
Not good
action
enough.
is no action. Um, that's worse than imperfect action, maybe. Will.
Yeah. Yeah, if I could just jump in here real quickly. I know we're at time, but kind of reflecting back to what Angela and Matt said, thinking about ways of communicating successes or just these policies in general. One of the things that we're going to be doing as a work group is holding our Mid-Atlantic Marine Debris Summit November 12th, 13th, and 14th in Dewey Beach, Delaware. And we're going to be having a breakout session as a follow-up to this whole webinar series of, so what's next? What can we do? And those are some really good concrete suggestions on things that we as a work group can do to try and help build educational materials to socialize these concepts and make them more familiar, help connect decision makers to lessons learned, things like that. So just help connecting the dots between everybody and getting the word out there. So we invite everybody to that also on the Marco website, but also invite your ideas on that, even if you can't make it. We're all ears on that. So anyway, with that, thank you to everybody. And I'll give it back to Steve to close things out, but really appreciate the panelists today.
Yeah, I think that Will, thanks. I think that was a wonderful segue or promotion to what's next, which is the summit. And so I hope you all will consider joining us there. I want to thank the speakers, all four of you on the panel, for sharing insights. It was a very nice, well-rounded panel. Thanks to Joe and to Will, to Jess for putting this together. This has been a great series and very helpful. I'm sure you all agree. So thanks for that. I'm sure you all have some new understandings and focus areas after listening to the webinars. So thanks for all the information. There will be a recording for today's webinar and for the full series available on Marco's Marine Debris webpage. So find it there. Slide decks, etc., will be available. Thanks all for your time today, and we'll see you at the summit.